They love all the medium stuff. They don't work hard enough. They don't run fast enough to get fast. They don't lift heavy enough to get strong. And they don't rest enough to actually recover. Lift as heavy or as explosively as they need to. And rest, like actually rest and recover as much as they need to.
If the nutrition is up and it's not good, if your function's bad, then how much hypertrophy are you really going to get? Or how
the conditioning to me is the easiest part. That's the easy stuff. If you're willing to put the work in, the speed, is a little trickier and the strength a little trickier, but
sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk. All right, guys, we're back with another episode of Table Talk. Today, my guest is Matt Nichol along with Sam Brown. Did I pronounce that right?
You got it.
Yeah, you nailed mine, Dave. That was good.
Well, yeah, I was more concerned about yours. But Matt has worked in the strength and conditioning industry for damn near 4 decades.
26 years this year. So
well,
not quite that old.
I made you a little bit older. That's okay. And is currently working as a consultant.
Yes.
With professional athletes in regards to the strength and conditioning, but also rehab. And you've dealt with some special cases and stuff like that, which we can get into. And there's the supplement company that you're BioSteel.
Yes.
Right.
I'm no longer involved.
No longer involved with that, but have gone through that whole process of that as well. And last night I was trying to think of when was the last time I sat down with you for a conversation longer than 5 minutes? Because usually it's like a Swiss or something like that.
I do know the answer to that.
Tell me what do you think it is? Because I know what it is.
I know we had one at your old facility, but there's one time that stands out in my mind.
Yeah.
This is a long time 15
ago.
or 20 years ago. And I remember I was with the Toronto Maple Leafs hockey team. We were playing Columbus. And we met for lunch. Yeah. Some little deli right across by the arena had unbelievable pickles. I don't know why I remember that. But I do remember the one thing I do remember about this, you were talking at the time, and I don't know if you ever did it. You told me that you wanted to write an article called I don't know how you should train, or I've never trained anybody. This is your story. You said, listen, I have no idea. You're going to say, I have no idea how you should train. I have no idea what you should do. I don't know what you should eat or what you should take. This is what I do. This is what I know works for me. I know for sure it works. I can tell you what I've seen other people do, but I'm not an expert in this. And I thought that always stuck with me because you are one of the people that certainly could espouse to be an expert in everything. And a large number of people would believe that. Yeah. But the humility that you have, I think that came through. But that conversation, I think that's the one.
That's the conversation that I remember because it was forever ago. Yeah. And, it was big fat bloated Dave too, because I think I was still competing at the time. Yeah. So it was a different version. Yeah. And I actually think I went to that game as well. And I remember being in the lobby before we ended up going where, and I didn't know at the time how tall hockey players were. Because anytime I'd see them, they're you're in the stands on the ice, and it was like, oh my God, these guys are like, to me, it looked, I'm not super short, but they looked like they were 9 foot tall and they were big as hell. Yeah. And I remember the conversation because you were asking about West Side stuff and kind of going back and forth, and it was a training discussion, and I remembered it, so let's put it that way. So it was meaningful, and I walked away like, this guy knows his shit, because it was a different time, with where I was training wise too. Because, there's no doubt that there's no mystery that Louis thought, everything strength training was that, right? But then having the ability to speak to, Matt, people like yourself, and then hearing other philosophies and then how it's all applied was shaping me at that time. Because there are other ways, and then athletes have different motor abilities that they require, to be able to do what they do. And knowledge sharing wasn't very prevalent back then. And it was hard because you had to travel and stuff like that.
There's no social media.
Yeah. And a lot of the strength coaches I would meet, because I was consulting a lot at the time there as well, really didn't know what they were doing. They didn't. Because I would, and I'm sure I did with you, I'm probing like, what do you do? What do you do? What do you do? Because the only real help I could offer is if I can see some gap that they don't have. And then I can talk about that gap, but all the other stuff I don't know. But it was a long conversation because there was a lot going on. And that was It was a long time.
Probably close to 20 years ago.
Probably 20 years ago. It was a long time ago. So what's been going on since then?
Yeah, so it's been I'd say almost 15 years that I haven't worked in the league, or I haven't worked for that team in particular. So when I left the Toronto Maple Leafs job, I opened up a little private facility in Toronto, and primarily training hockey players. We trained a little. We had couple of NFL guys and a couple of NBA guys and baseball players and things like that. But hockey's sort of, at least in my neck of the woods, that's the bread and butter. And at the same time, when I left the team, I started up that company, the BioSteel, which is a supplement company. It became a hydration drink company. It kind of morphed into something entirely, different and beyond. And also now consulting with teams. So a lot of times it might be a one-off. You might go in for a day, which is really not something I try not to do that as much anymore. I used to do it before because it paid the bills, but like somebody walking into your business and telling you how to run it, and they leave at the end of the day. It doesn't usually go over well. It's not well received by the people that are suddenly being told how to do their job by some strange guy they don't know. So, but I have a few teams now where I'm a little bit more involved. Where I would sort of sometimes it's to implement a staff, or sometimes it's help to develop a staff. And much like you did in our lunch conversation, you've done with many people. It's not, I'm not coming in usually in those jobs. I don't come in with answers, or I don't have the Matt Nichol method of doing stuff. It's about just going in and asking lots of questions and seeing, sometimes they might be doing 9 out of 10 things right, but it's that one other thing they're not doing that's going to push them to the next level, or it's one thing that they're doing that they need to stop doing. And usually it revolves around reducing injuries. That's sort of the big metric now. A lot of times that's when someone like me comes in, that's sort of the role. The team's having they're either having success, but they have a lot of injuries, which causes them, obviously there's a financial implication of that, or they're not having success because for that same reason. And it's sort of my job to kind of come in and troubleshoot that.
Now, with those injuries, I assume they're not contact injury, or are they contact?
Well, they're both. I mean, when you're working in sports like, as you know, when you work in sports like hockey and football, there are contact injuries. They're not just like basketball is a contact sport. Yeah. Football and hockey are collision sports. So there's going to be stuff. You're going to break stuff. It's going to happen. Right. So I think those, you kind of put those over on one side, and it's all the other things that those non-contact soft tissue injuries. Those are the things that they're not, I don't want to say they're 100% preventable, because that's not accurate, but I think to a large extent, a lot of them are preventable.
Over the years, because as when you were actually coaching at the Maple Leafs compared to the coaching now, right? What are some of the biggest changes that you've seen? We're going to go pros and good and bad. Yeah. So what are the more positive changes you've seen across the league or with players? Yeah, well, I mean, first and foremost, I'd say when I started in the NHL, I didn't come into that job replacing anyone. There wasn't someone there. So I think the fact that you had a professional sports team, without a full-time strength and conditioning coach, to me is just, it's wild. I can't even imagine that. But and at that time, even when I got hired, still not every team had a full-time person. So I think, our industry, other than maybe religion or politics, is probably the worst thing for people arguing about minutiae of stupid bullshit. But so you can argue all day long about what's good or bad, or what you like or what you don't like. But I'd say at least now, for the most part, all the teams would have a staff, whether that's one or two guys. Some of them have a very robust staff, but I think that's good no matter what. I think that I've seen if I speak just about, if I'm just speaking about hockey, I think there was a period of time where most of the guys were doing nothing. They probably went for a bike ride or played some pickup, something, played some tennis, did something, ripped off a set of push-ups or whatever, and then all of a sudden, guys started, really getting into aerobic training and circuit training, which again was better than nothing. And then I think at one point in time, and probably it was probably Charles Poliquin that was largely responsible for pushing that forward, and through his client, who's Gary Roberts, another colleague of mine now. And then it almost went, the pendulum swung back the other way, and guys were lifting, which is great. I think being strong is always good. I think I don't care if you're a football player, hockey player, ballerina, ping pong player. I think being stronger inevitably is going to help, assuming that you do it without fucking yourself up somehow in the process, right? So I think that was mostly good. But I think there were some guys that maybe, lost sight of what the actual end goal of the training was. And I think a lot of the guys were getting bigger, and which can be good, not necessarily though for hockey, but
and they were getting stronger, but I think sometimes they weren't doing maybe in the best way or the most efficient way. And then you saw a bit of an uptick in some of the non-contact soft tissue injuries that we were just talking about.
Yeah.
And I think it's sort of swinging back to a better place now. I think I think in general, the athletes are training. The sport has changed. So when you would have come to the game, and I remember this too, you're talking about how big and tall the hockey players are. And you might have been a little bit impressed like that. There was a guy on the team who was real special to me. He's no longer with us. He passed away, but he was a guy by the name of Wade Belak, who was one of our tough guys, one of our fighters. And Wade was about 6'4" and about 225. But he saw you in the lobby that day. And he said, I remember he came back and he goes, Matty, it must be one of your buddies out there. It's the biggest guy I've ever seen in my life is standing in the fucking hallway. So he said, he's probably here for you. So you made an impression on him just like he might have on you. But I think there was a little bit more of that. There was a lot more contact. There was a lot more clutching, holding, grabbing. They've eliminated a lot of that from the sport just with some rule changes. Yeah. There still is fighting, but there's a lot less of it. And there's not, when I was first starting in the NHL, there were, at least one, usually two guys on a team that were, they wouldn't like it to be said that way, but they were primarily there to fight.
Yeah.
They still had to play the game. And and don't get me wrong, like if that was your job, and even if you are right now, if you are the worst player in the NFL or you are the worst player in the NBA or the NHL, you're still an elite world-class athlete. You're still better than 99.9% of the other guys. So even those guys are still really good. But I think now, because of those changes now, there are some players in the league now that aren't, very big or very strong by our typical weight room standards. But because we've eliminated that, those smaller guys can be still effective. So the training is, I'd say now, I'm getting really long-winded here.
No, you're good.
I think that when I started, it was all about when guys would come in to see me privately is I need to get bigger and stronger and faster. It's the same conversation now, but I have to get faster and more powerful and stronger, less about the bigger.
Okay. Because there really is no off season because the season is forever.
Yeah.
And so going back then, were the athletes at that time seeking people like Paul Quinn or just anybody else in that short off season? Or I'm kind of relating it to the NFL. So, that's been a big change, where there were a couple, going back that far, and now almost all of them, where there was more accountability kind of in the off season than during the season, because during the season, there's nobody there.
Yes.
Or it's also a tricky thing, which we'll talk about in a little bit.
Yeah.
Because the season is really long. Where was that the case, that there was just a few and now there's way more that will seek outside help?
Absolutely. I think it's, maybe not quite to the extent that you see in the NFL or some of these sports like the NBA. Everybody's got their guy, on each team. There's, I don't know if there's 14 players, there's probably 8 guys, their private guy, their guru guy. That's not quite to that extent. But I think the vast majority of these players have their own private person that they see in the summer. And sometimes it's because of the, the quality of the training that person offers. Sometimes it's just because maybe they play in Winnipeg or they play in Columbus, or they play somewhere and they want to go home to where they want to go home. So maybe they might have a fantastic setup with their team, might have a great team staff, but home is home. And, the guys don't, like, as you said, they might only get 2 months of an off season. So a lot of them want to just get away and go somewhere. So there's some of that too, for sure.
Yeah. Especially with hockey players, they're playing at such a young age. And it's what they do.
Absolutely.
Like, it's who they are. And I've worked with hockey players in the past, and they're some of the most just savage animals that I've worked with, because it's such a tough and grueling sport and at a high level. I would love to hear your perspective on, like, what are some of those preventable or reasonably preventable soft tissue that you've seen over the last few years, maybe taking a shift towards, different things you have to worry about or stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned something that's true. I find that with each sport, and you can't stereotype. Obviously, there's unique people in every sport, but that's one of the things that I love about hockey players, and it's the love-hate thing, is that they love to work hard.
Oh yeah.
They love to work hard. I never have to worry about again, there are exceptions to every rule, but in general, my hockey clients are always on time. They're always on time. They always work hard. In fact, it becomes a little bit problematic, at least in the early stages of our off season, where we're really trying to kind of do rehab and correct some of these injuries. If they don't perceive the workout to be hard, they're not going to buy in.
Yeah.
And it's funny. I used to do, years ago, if I went back, like when I did my, my master's, Tutor Bompa was my primary advisor on my master's. So
I was just going to ask about that.
I was a classic, traditional periodization guy. And I remember when I took my first job in the NHL, Tutor and I sat down for a weekend and went through it. And I had all of our training planned from September 1st until the Stanley Cup final. All of our percentages this day was, 77.5, and there were 82. Like, I threw that thing in the garbage, 24 hours into my job. But I think that, those guys, when you do things like we used to do, deload or unloading weeks, that was a complete disaster. Like, well, I could have done like 20 of those. Should I just do 20 of those? Like, what are we doing? This doesn't make any sense. Or dynamic effort days. Yeah. I used to do almost like not, I wouldn't say it was cut and paste, but it was, very similar to just a normal West Side Conjugate system with my hockey players. And it's not what I do now. And it wasn't perfect, but I'll tell you what, it was very effective. Not perfect, but better than, 90% of the other stuff that was out there. But that's an example, like the dynamic effort day. Why am I only doing 3? Why am I only doing, this doesn't make any sense. Yeah. I can go way heavier than this. That's a hard concept for them to get. But they are, like you said, anything they will squat or lunge or whatever till they collapse. They'll do conditioning till they puke. They don't want to do things that are easy, which is a problem. Like, they don't want to.
Yeah. So do you put like parameters around exercises where they can still feel like they work hard?
We do.
The systemic fatigue isn't as high.
We do. And it's a lot of education. I mean, I'm not going to lie. There's times early, there's times early in the summer where we do like 45 minutes of corrective exercise in Eldoa, and then we finish with, wrist rollers to failure. So they go, that was so hard. And they feel like they did something really hard. Or we'll do an ISO hold to like make them feel like we crushed them, even though that really wasn't the purpose, but we have to make sure we give them a little bit, there's a little bit of give and take there. So there's some of that. But I think a lot of it comes down to education and just explaining and sitting down. And some of those guys, I mean, and some of them are, Gary Roberts is an example we gave already. The guy that you met in the lobby that day, Wade was super into training. And I would tell him, after we had lunch, I showed him who you were and told him everything. We talked about it. And I think so that goes a long way, is helping them understand why we're doing what we're doing and why we're doing it this way. That's a big part of it. We do a lot of velocity-based training. That's not a bandwagon thing here. We've been doing it since 2002. And the reason I started doing it was in season as a cover my ass principle, because that way, and at the time we had 24 guys and one coach, and I'm trying to watch everybody and do everything. There's an easy way if they were doing a compound movement where I could say, hey, go as heavy as you want to, as long as you're hitting this number. So helping them understand that's super effective, I think, for that reason. But I think, coming back to your question, setting those parameters, like you said, and saying, okay, this is like on each day, and it's maybe not a full formal meeting, but having them understand this is what we're doing today. This is the theme of the day. Yeah, this is what we're doing. And I think this is something that I think you've addressed before, and people on this podcast have talked about. Do you have to be able to do it? Like, do you have to have been Dave Tate to be able to be a good strength coach? I don't think so, but I think it sure helps, because if you know what it's supposed to feel like to do a 1 rep max or a 3 RM or a dynamic effort day, you can explain and understand, listen, what we're doing today on dynamic effort, we're trying to go as fast as we can. It's not going to be that heavy. It should be it's got to be heavy enough that you're paying attention, that you know we're working, but understanding what it's supposed to feel like. I think that goes a long way with athletes, and explaining that to them. That helps with those parameters. Like, this is the theme of the day. This is what we're trying to do. This is what we're not trying to do. Or understanding the most important thing on this exercise today is the tempo. It's a rule for me, at least. Maybe that's old school meathead mentality, but we never go light. You would never go light. That doesn't make any sense to me. You should always go as heavy as you possibly can. Yeah,
within those.
Yeah, might mean 2.5 pounds on a rotator cuff exercise with perfect technique. But we're not trying to go light. The technique or that exercise, the biomechanics necessitates that they got to go light. Well, I know, for me, maybe it's just the verbiage, but I would never say that. So I would understand that today we're always going as heavy as we can, but it's got to move at this speed, or we're always going as heavy as we can, but we have to use this tempo on our eccentric, or whatever the case may be.
But even being able to have that conversation with them too is knowing what verbiage to use and what verbiage not to use. I imagine has a tremendous impact on buy-in.
I think so. I mean, for me, I think that's everything. I think it's huge, being able to relate to those athletes and again, bring it down to them in a level that they understand.
Yeah.
I was going to ask about the Pumpa thing, because I do remember that when we spoke that long time ago, I was trying to absorb his theory and methodology when it was the red book, right? And when it's tough, man.
You gave me that red book.
No, it's tough, right? And so I had a lot of questions, and you were able to fill in a lot of those gaps with that, to be able to get a better, and this was before the block periodization by Ursland and all these other ones kind of came out, which makes it a little bit easier to kind of, but even his philosophy is different. And the macro plan was what was interesting when we were speaking, is because I'm looking at that, then I know that's kind of where your background lied, or whatever. And that, then I'm trying to wrap my head around, this is like a 10-month season. Like how in the hell are you going to lay out blocks? And then what are the blocks to be able to lay out when it is this? And you were trying to figure that out at that time, because I can see where this would have been hard. First of all, it was hard to understand the frickin' book. And then this would be a rant. Then when they went and republished it under what it is now,
they dumbed it
the
down.
Red book's better.
Yeah.
Like, struggle through the Red book and find somebody that can help you if you can still find it, because that's probably more grounded in the real philosophy of what it is instead of the other ones. And he had one, the Periodization to Strength, which was a blue one, which was more just bodybuilding wise. Actually, I still recommend that to a lot of people, just because of the adaptation phase and the strength phase, the peak phase, the power phase. It breaks things out very, very simply. And actually, I was able to use a lot of the material from that when I was doing the West Side seminars to say, here's parameters for dynamic effort work, because that was basically a chapter in that book. But when I would see that, then I would go to the Red book and be like, ooh, like, what the hell is going on with this? So my assumption is your training philosophy, did it completely break for that, or is it still kind of there? And how has it changed from, you're in a different situation too, because you don't know how long you're going to have the athlete, which can you really lay out a macro plan for that in the first place? So how has that evolved over time?
Oh, I mean, first of all, great question. That could be a whole series of podcasts just that one. But I think one thing it's important for me is this. I always feel it's important to me, at least, to give respect where it's due, and to acknowledge the people that, so that blue book, the Periodization, the New Wave of Strength, that was the first real strength and conditioning book that I ever read.
Oh, really?
Outside of bodybuilding magazines, or maybe somehow you could find a powerlifting magazine, where I was, but that was the first real book, and it kind of it changed everything for me. And just, and through that, I actually had an opportunity to speak to him, and him trying to, in a 5-minute conversation. It was at the end of my first year of playing university football. And I don't know what everybody else does, but I'd be pretty confident saying, I think I worked as hard as any guy at Ohio State or Michigan, or whatever. I probably just didn't have, I didn't have the talent or the genes. And I also didn't have any clues to what I was doing, but I know the effort was there, doing all the wrong shit. But in that conversation that I had with him after having read that book, just the concept of, instead of doing 3 sets of 10, you'd be better off doing 10 sets of 3. Mm-hmm. Instead of running 100-yard sprints, you'd be better off running, I was a rush end. So instead of running 4 100-yard sprints, you'd be better off to running 104-yard sprints.
Right.
I know it sounds probably really simple to everybody else who's listening, but keep in mind, again, this is 30 plus years ago. Yeah. And there was no internet, or at least there wasn't for, I don't know. I'd never seen the internet. I didn't have a computer. I had no TikTok or Instagram. So that was mind blowing for me. And my results in the gym in one off season went like this. And my results on the field, I went from literally not stepping on the field once the season before, not once, not for a second, not one rep, to starting the next year. So, I mean, for me at that time, that was That was all I needed to know. That was enough research for me. So I think that I at least want to give respect to that. Now,
did that inspire you to want to move forward as being a strength coach?
No, being unsuccessful as a football player inspired me. Yeah, when I still would have loved to just train for football. But I think that, but it was in, then all of a sudden, probably, a couple of years later, I did start going on the internet, because that was, any young person listening is going to sound like this the most crazy concept that there was no internet, but you know that.
No, there was no internet.
And reading everything that you put out and everything that, and you were hugely influential in my development, just all the stuff that you shared and put out. And anyway, so thank you for that. But and then stumbling, and I was, at the time in the summers, I was training with a powerlifter, a guy by the name of Jeff Becker, who was a champion powerlifter up in Canada, or I think he still has some world records, at least for his weight class there. But that again was more classic periodization, like the 12-week program. We'd sets of 8 all the way down to whatever we would do. But it wasn't when I came across Westside that just made so much more sense to me. For that exact reason, when you look at the off season, in my off season, I might have one NHL player, if his team doesn't make the playoffs and he's healthy. I mean, and that's, air quotes on the healthy, because even if they're not injured, there's probably a bunch of stuff that needs to be fixed. But like, I could have that guy for 4.5 months. And I might have another, and this is, we've had, in our gym in the last 12 or 13 years, we've had 12 Stanley Cup winners, which is pretty cool. But you might have those guys for 4 weeks. And when they show up, for sure, those guys are smashed. If they went all the way to the Stanley Cup finals, they probably haven't slept in 3 months. They've just been wired for 3 months. They're battered and bruised. So is this anatomical adaptation? And if it is, training camp's 8 weeks away. What phase are they in then for training camp? How does that work? So I think that for most of the athletes, most of the professional athletes, I'm talking about team sport athletes. I don't deal with marathon runners or triathletes. For those people, I think Tudor stuff or any of the traditional periodization models, I think they would work probably great. But I can't speak to that because I don't train those athletes. But I have, NBA and WNBA basketball players and Major League Baseball players and NFL and CFL football players and NHL hockey players.
They're all long seasons.
And we're doing conjugated.
Actually, the NFL might be the shortest season out of everything you're working with.
Yeah, for sure.
And especially if they don't make the playoffs.
100%.
In hockey, like every team makes the playoff.
not quite, but there's a lot more.
There's a lot.
Yeah.
So how do you lay that out for if you do have them all the time, right? So it's in season and then the off season. How do you manage for the longer duration? So we'll stay with hockey. Baseball would be another one that can be very long because of the spring. Or
I would say again,
which is the longest? Would it be baseball or hockey?
Probably hockey could be. I think baseball is right up there too. Baseball, basketball, hockey are all fairly similar. I'd say probably basketball and hockey are probably up there, but. Again, that to me is why conjugate, I believe that it makes more sense for the athlete. I know that it makes more sense for the guy who's running the program and trying to organize all that, because everybody is running through those same phases more or less. Now, again, assuming that they're not doing rehab, once they've been cleared to do whatever, everyone could be doing that same phase. Now you might be way further down the road than me, but we're still doing dynamic day, or we're doing a max effort day. That makes more sense.
So go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask. I mean, so I come from a baseball background, so I worked primarily with baseball players, like on the athletic side of things. And from when I was playing to when I was a strength coach for baseball players, the assessment process and the technology just skyrocketed. Like baseball's got Rapsodo, and it's like rotational speed, like exit velocity, all this stuff, right? I would love to hear how, again, you don't need to give all the secrets away, but in terms of bringing somebody in, like a new athlete, a new NHL guy, it's like, how do you go about assessing and kind of starting them in a good position to be able to kind of build up over the course of time? Because ideally, they'd be like, oh, I'm going to be with you for my entire career, right? So I would love to hear that sort of, insight into how you bring somebody into the fold of athletes. Yeah,
it's a great question. It's funny, when I was first starting out, or anytime I start out with a brand new athlete or a brand new sport, even at this stage in my career, when I go into a new team or I have a new client, I still get anxious. I get a little nervous. I want to, I want to stay up the night before and make sure I get it right. I've had a couple cool opportunities to deal with some different sports or different athletes that, you know, I had a client previously who was the number one wheelchair sprint athlete in the world.
Oh shit.
But that was the same thing. I'm sitting up the night before, just what the hell do I know about this sport? I know nothing. I've never been in a wheelchair. I don't know how to do it. I don't know what you got to do, and it forced me to learn. So I think that the one thing though, as I get further along, this is coming up on almost 30 years now in this business, what I realize is that baseball, you know, hockey, football, pitcher, catcher, point guard, whatever, they're human beings, and there are certain fundamentals that it doesn't matter, you know, which throwing program that they want to follow if they have dysfunction in their shoulder. So you can go to, you know, whichever expert of the day, and, you know, you're talking about, you know, exit velocity. I don't give a shit about their exit velocity. If they can't stabilize their neck, if they can't stabilize their shoulder, if they don't have proper motion, if they don't have proper strength levels. So I think that there's a lot of good, and I'm part of that new wave of sports science, quote unquote. I think there's a lot of good stuff about that. I think the problem sometimes is that we forget that they still need to be healthy, and they need to be strong. Right. And then once you've accomplished that, then all that other stuff is super important. But I think that stuff gets a little bit more play these days when people forget that you still need those other things. And I would say that there's, I always give credit to early on in my professional career of doing this for a living. I spent a lot of time studying under Paul Chek, who was a mentor of mine. And that was a huge difference maker in my career, because that, you know, that understanding of, you know, it doesn't matter what their 40 time is, or their bench press is, or their squat is, if they've got, you know, an ACL tear, or they got a pec tear, or they got a whatever tear, right? So making sure that and it also doesn't matter, you know, what their 40 time or their bench time, or if they can't go to sleep at night, or they're depressed and they can't get out of bed in the morning, right? So all those things come into play. So I think that starting with any of those athletes, most of the time, I could think of, one baseball player that I've worked with pops into my mind right now, where we had tremendous results. I'm the furthest thing from an expert in baseball, but this guy in particular had some super basic weaknesses that needed to be fixed and shored up to make him feel good. I believe that, and I mean, I'm not just saying this because you're here. I really think of all the professional sports that I work with, that is the most unique. The ability to hit a baseball at the major league level, or to throw a strike at the major league level, or to throw from the wall to home plate. That's crazy. That's such a unique skill set. Right. That's something that I don't want to say you can't teach or coach, because I'd like to be optimistic and think you can get better at everything. But if they already have that, then you just got to get this person healthy, because they already have that magic ability. And then make them stronger. And then I think then you can, you've built this car, you built the engine. Now you can add the racing stripes and the spoiler and the special muffler and all that, that's kind of the extra stuff to me.
Absolutely. And it's funny, because as a baseball player, I was always looking at hockey players. I'm like, oh shit, I should have played hockey. Because for us, it was always this foreign thing. I'm like, you play a sport with razor blades on your feet. Like, this is so wild. It's just a wild experience, because I've learned how to ice skate, but I'm like, you watch an NHL game and the speed at which the game happens is unbelievable. Same thing in Major League Baseball. It's like, you go to a stadium, like, I'm from Rhode Island, so like Red Sox are always the thing. You go to Fenway, it's such a small stadium that you're seeing the speed of these athletes and how quick everything happens. And it's like, that's the thing where I'm like, holy shit. It's like, if you have somebody that can handle that and that can compete at that level, step one is make sure they don't trip over something in the weight room.
100%.
Well, with the NHL, you got to remember, they got to highlight the puck on TV so you can see it.
For Americans.
Imagine, that's true.
Please.
That's true.
Yeah, but Canadians are born with that sense.
With that baseball player you just were speaking about, how did you go about that? How did you go about working with that person?
Well, I think I shared with him the fact that, I've worked with as many or maybe more NHL hockey players than anybody else in the world. I never played hockey. I don't know how to skate. And I think that there's a guy by the name of Steve Stales, who's now the new president of the Ottawa Senators NHL team, was my very first NHL client. And when he came to see me, I told him, sir, I can't help you. I train football players. I don't train hockey players. Not because I don't want to or don't need the business, because I don't know how to do it. I assumed I couldn't do it. It's some special thing. And he kind of pressured me on it and said, hey, I remember the time he said, well, I've been training like a hockey player my whole career and it's not really working. So maybe I should try training like somebody else. Was his comment, a bit of a joke between us now. But I think at the time I went back to, okay, I'm scared. I was scared. I'm like, I don't want to screw this up. This guy's not a men's league. He's not playing Wednesday night at 10 o'clock. He's like this. So but then I came back to wait. No. Maybe I'm not an expert in that sport, but you know what? I do have some expertise in biomechanics and I do have some expertise in biochemistry. And I do know, how to get this guy's body to function properly. Maybe I'm not, maybe I don't know how exactly to do it, but in the meantime, another, Paul Chek thing that he talks about, that Chinese medical concept of surround the dragon. But, until I can figure out exactly what he needs to do, in the meantime, I know that his hips are tight and I know he's weak and I know that his, upper back is weak. I'm not sure. There's still other things I got to figure out, but that could keep me busy for the next month fixing those things.
Right. And something else can pop up.
I mean, I would feel very confident, if any Major League Baseball pitcher walked in my gym, there'd be that brief moment of panic, like, holy shit, I don't want to screw this guy up. But then I would come back to, no, in the meantime, this guy's got, I don't know, he's got a restricted internal rotation on his right hip. His left shoulder's all jacked up. So while I'm figuring out exactly what the best program in the world is for this guy, I know for sure that those things have got to be fixed.
So if I take one of those things like the rotation of the hip, how would you address that?
Yeah,
what's that look like?
Yeah, in our facility, I mean, this is the one thing when anyone asks about what I do or what I would say that at any of the teams that I work with, we have an unbelievable staff. Incredible athletic therapists, chiropractors, physiotherapists, medical doctors, the actual position coaches. I'm really lucky that way. In my facility, where again, people are coming to see me. The way I see it is it's my responsibility to get the result, which sometimes means I'm doing a lot of the things. Sometimes it means I'm almost doing none of the things. We have probably 30 people on staff. We have osteopaths, chiropractors, physiotherapists, massage therapists, athletic therapists. We've got a general surgeon who helps us out with concepts like that. We've got actual sport position specific coaches, Eldoa instructors, Pilates instructors, yoga instructors, all the regular, trainers, whatever it is that we are, trainers, coaches, whatever that is. So it really is that team effort. And any one of those cases, they might have a serious strength issue that, they're otherwise generally pretty healthy, but they just got to get stronger. We have some guys that come in and they need a ton of soft tissue work, electroacupuncture, ART, whatever modality that our therapists are using. And we're doing a little bit of corrective work, but the magic was done by our chiropractic staff. Some people, the magic is done with my sports psychology staff. We've had a few of those cases where I can think of, I can think of one case in particular pops into my mind now where if anyone on this guy's team or around the league said, man, you look great this year, what'd you do? It's, I work with Matt. But the reality is the magic was with our sports psych person. This guy, I mean, I think I did a decent job.
So who's doing the triage? Are you doing the triage?
I'm doing the triage. And that's where I really feel like I think I'm a good strength coach. But there's lots of, we're going to be at Swiss this weekend. There's lots of guys that are better. I think, in my gym, I'm pretty good, but I'm sure there's, 100 guys that could teach a squat better than I can, or teach a snatch or a clean. I think I'm in the mix, but I'm not the best at any of those things. But I think where I really feel like I am strong is that triage ability, is to say, someone walks in the door where I say, listen, I know exactly what you need. It might have nothing to do with me. I might not play a role in this at all, but I know who you need and what you need.
And you have it.
Yeah. And I have it. Yeah. And if I don't, I'd say that's the one thing, is that all the success I've had in my career. I mean, my first boss was Mauro Di Pasquale, and Ken Kanakin soon after, at the same time, for a different reason. And through those guys, I met Eric Serrano, and I met you, and met so many other people. That having a network like that where I can plug into, or say, listen, I can get you fixed. I'm not going to be the guy to fix you, but you know who you need to meet? You need to meet Bob or Susie or Steve or whoever it is. And the one thing I think early on in my career, this is probably something I got from Ken more than anybody else. Most people in my business are afraid to refer out. I refer 100% of my clients out to at least one, and sometimes a dozen different people. And I think that I probably had the same fears that many other trainers have early on, is that I don't want to refer this person out because they might not come back. I don't want to lose the business, or I don't want to send them. I'd be afraid to send them to you, Dave, because you'd take a look and go, this guy's squat looks like shit. Yeah. What's Matt been doing? Yeah. I don't want to be embarrassed, right? Or I don't want to send them to a therapist who says, oh my God, your hips are a mess. What's Matt doing with the training? This is terrible. Once I got over that ego insecurity piece and started sending those people out, I even every once in a while, some of those people, you send them out and they get fixed and they never come back. If someone ran into that person on the street and said, hey, I'm thinking about training with this guy, Matt, oh, he's amazing. Totally fixed my hip.
Oh, the referral always comes back.
I didn't do anything to his hip. I sent him to someone who fixed his hip.
Oh, yeah.
Or I sent him to the sports psych that fixed the problem. Or I sent him to the nutritionist that fixed the problem. So once I saw that my job is to help that person reach their goal, even if that means not with me, once I got to that, my success just went to another level.
Well, the biggest takeaway I'm taking from that is, for young coaches that are coming in, build your network.
Huge.
It's vital.
Huge.
And for me, Swiss was a catalyst too, because we're going way back from that, because Eric's the one that kind of talked me into doing the first one, but then you meet all these other people. So I'm still competing at the time. So I get fucked up. There's a text going to Ken, or then he doesn't know, and it's going to somebody else. And all of a sudden I have this bigger network, with Louis as well. So I don't want to discount that at all, but there's damage I'm trying to mitigate because I'm on the back end of my career, just trying to squeak out whatever I can. Hopefully not being crippled as I get older, which, I mitigated some of that, but not all of that. But I wish I would have had that network sooner. Right. And that's a piece that I don't think is being mentioned enough today, is people need to build that network with, professionals. Obviously you want people that know more than what you do, but even if you're meeting people that are kind of in the same place that you are at that time, they will grow. They will learn. It's all the people that I've had in my network over the past 17 years or whatever it is are completely different now than they were then, but they're also way better now. And their answers would be different. Which means you're a good coach. Like if your answers change over a period of time, then you're learning something. If it's the same answer you would have gotten 15 years ago, then either you're a genius, which is not likely, or you got a shitty network and you haven't, learned, you haven't educated yourself.
Yeah.
So your initial needs analysis, which is kind of what we were talking about beforehand, basically all lies in their function.
Yeah, for sure. And it's, again, being in this so long, I don't want to say that, you get a read on somebody, but you know that too. When someone walks into your facility, 8 or 9 times out of 10, pretty quick, like, I don't know everything that you need to do, but I know this is where we got to start. Like you could size a guy up and, and look at him in 2 seconds and probably know.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know exactly what your program is, and I don't exactly know how we're going to get from A to Z, but I know we got to do this.
What was one of the, because there's been a lot, when I ask this, something's going to come to your mind immediately, but what was one of the most challenging that you've had to deal with?
Cases?
Yes.
Wow. We've had a few. Well, I mean, the wheelchair gentleman, I tell you, that was more fun than.
Yeah, I was going to say, that sounds fun to me.
This guy is, I mean, you guys would hit it off. This guy was wild. He was as hardcore and nuts as any guy that you've ever trained with. He would be up for, I mean, this guy, and just a crazy, crazy pain threshold for this guy. And he loved it. He loved it. Like, he would love nothing more than just, if he would be able to get into that rack with you in your heyday and go rep for rep with someone like you. This guy was wild. But I think that there was probably the most substantial case. There's a goaltender by the name of Ray Emery who had avascular necrosis, which was the same, not exactly the same way his was handled, but it was the same base underlying issue as Bo Jackson, the thing that ended his career. In Ray's case, they did what was an experimental surgery at the time. They did a fibula graft, so they actually removed his fibula and harvested a piece of the bone, drilled it back into his hip, and created an artificial blood supply. And I guess there had only been at that time, from what I understand, and I hope if this is wrong, someone can correct me, but from what I understand at the time, there had only been one other ice hockey player who had it done. One other athlete was a goaltender, young college goaltender, who ended up eventually taking his own life because he just couldn't, the pain was insurmountable, I guess. So no one had ever come back from this. So there wasn't anyone I could, even that amazing network that I built up, there wasn't anyone I could call. And the only person, and this guy was incredibly generous with his time, Bo Jackson actually was able to reach out and lend some advice and help, which was incredible, because he's the only other guy who sort of dealt with it. He didn't have the same procedure. And even he didn't come back to football. He came back to baseball, but not to football. So that was probably the one of the most extreme cases, because it was one where there was nothing to Google. There's no book to read. And it was just, talking to everyone I could abstractly and saying, okay, what are good exercises in general for the hip? What are things that may help or may not help? And then even then, if you could, the best case scenario outcome from the surgeon was, the goal was to get him to be able to function, like to be able to walk, go up and down stairs. There was never a thought in the surgeon's mind this guy would ever play hockey again. So anyway, long story short, he was able to come back, played in the NHL, won a Stanley Cup, was, him and his goalie partner in Chicago, the other one, were the two best goaltenders statistically that year, had a long career beyond that. So that was probably the case that challenged me the most professionally.
As you were working with him, there's obviously things that are going to work and not going to work. And how did you know when to pivot? Was it the pain that he would experience, or like what metrics were being used?
He's an interesting case. I mean, if anyone that follows hockey or knew him, he was a very different. I mean, you could look him up, or you could read a little bit, but he was a unique guy. He's the toughest person I've ever met in my life. He passed away a couple of years ago, but the toughest person I've ever met in my life, the toughest athlete by far, both tough. I mean, even though he was a goalie and that's not his job, he would throw down with anybody in the league. He'd have no problem walking into, he's not a small guy. He was 6'2", 6'3", 215, 210 kind of thing, but he'd wait outside West Side, and if anyone wanted to have a piece of him, he'd stand in there and take it. And like he was,
but he was a little bit crazy. He was a little bit challenges though, because his pain tolerance is so high, you don't know.
Well, this was the problem. That was the problem. And I remember it was funny. The first week that we worked together, there's not a word. Like not, and this is again so all the other players are back in season, and at that time I didn't have any business in the season. I really had just an off-season business. So it was me and him by ourselves in a 950 square foot room. And I don't know if you really don't do that, but you can maybe appreciate like one-on-one training. There's, there's the science of training, but then there's also, but that's a long, and we were going twice a day.
Oh, and he's not talking?
No, like not.
I worked as a personal trainer for
zero.
A decade.
Like,
oh boy.
Oh wow.
Like just, but I remember.
So did you have ESPN on the TV or anything?
No, I had no TV. No, it was a long ass hour. But like very forced conversation. And I remember I called his agent at the end of the week. I said, I don't think this is going so well. Like, I don't think this guy, like, do you want me to help you find somebody else? I don't think this is going very well. He said, oh, no, he loves it. He loves it. He told me it's great. And I said, he hasn't said a word to me all week. Like, but he said, no, just, he'll warm up to you eventually. But I think in his case, it was getting that understanding. And I think I sat down day one with him, and this guy had a very checkered past, had some trouble with the league, had some trouble with the law. It was just a bit of a wild guy. Yeah. And said, hey, listen, I asked around before you came, and I said, even if somehow we can pull off a miracle and get you to be able to even play the position, not at an NHL level, but be able to go into a butterfly and get up into stuff. That's not to say that you can do it at an NHL level. And even if you could get into an NHL level, the word on the street is that nobody would really want you because of all this other stuff. Yeah. And he said, okay, well, at that time he said, listen, you just fix my hip. I'll worry about the rest of it. I'll play hockey. And I said, okay. And I said, in that same conversation, I said, okay, it's really important as we go. I'm measuring stuff, both subjectively and objectively, but also you need to give me feedback. And, if anything hurts, he's like, nothing hurts. Just tell me what to do. And if you knew this guy, it was like, he's just that guy. Like, so, but that's a real thing. Understanding when to back off when your athlete doesn't, your client doesn't tell you when, or they don't give you that feedback.
Well, the truth is it does hurt. He's just dealing with it.
And most of these guys, they'll tell you right away that it hurts, and it's funny. Some of these, you've probably experienced that too. Some of the biggest, scariest NFL guys I had were the guys that would, complain the most or give me shit. It was like,
well, that's the opposite end. Yeah. It's like, it's a leg extension. It's supposed to burn. Yeah. So. Yeah. So this, but he was definitely like super high pain threshold in that guy. But again, good learning experience for me.
And I think one of the biggest misconceptions about dealing with professional athletes is that I think people forget that they're professional athletes, but they're like in a weight room, they could be potentially rookies.
Absolutely.
They really don't have the same background. And for you to be able to kind of figure out where they lie on that spectrum and kind of attack the problem appropriately is huge.
I think that was a big problem that I had early on in my career, because I played football, and I competed and shot, but I ran with the sprinters to help me training for football. But I would also go home in the summer and I would train with a power lifter. And then I started, when I was done football, I started competing in powerlifting, not to the level that I wouldn't talk about that in a room like this because it's kind of embarrassing, but I still did. I tried anyway, did my thing. So when I started training these athletes, I'm up all night reading T-Nation and, reading everything I can get my hands on. And I'm super excited about the latest and greatest. I forgot that some of these, they don't care. This is a means to an end. I'm super excited about the conjugate versus they just think, what am I doing? Like, just tell me what I'm doing and I'll do it. And also realizing, like you said, some of these athletes just, they needed such basic things. I'm worried about, I'm arguing about the minutia of training and this angle and this percentage, whatever. We had a kid my first year in the NHL on our testing. He did 0 chin-ups, 0 sit-ups, and 1 push-up. 1. And this guy scored, 43, 47 points in the NHL. Extremely skilled, right? So does he need conjugated, or what's like, should he be doing Zotman curls or preacher, which is do anything, do push-ups, do body weight squat, like anything, the most basic thing, and just get stronger.
And it's funny you mention that, because years ago, one of the first gyms I worked out of, the owner was the strength coach for the Bruins. So he would bring some of the Bruins players in and they'd be training and I'd be just watching them. I'm like, what the fuck? Like, it's amazing. There's the simple things that they were doing, because I was working with Gen Pop clients that were way more advanced in terms of the exercise selection than these NHL studs. And we're talking starters, like studs. Yeah. And it was like a very mind-blowing experience for me, because I was like, I watch you on the ice and you're a stud. And I watch you in here and you're goblet squatting. Like, it's one of those, it's what they needed.
But that would suggest to me that coach probably has some expertise, because I think typically what happens with a young coach, I would walk into a gym like this and say, oh shit, there's Dave Tate over there. Okay, I'm going to put 1,000 pounds on the bar to try to, that athlete doesn't care. He just looks at Dave and goes, oh, there's some big, huge, strong guy. Okay, what am I doing? Right. But I think I remember when that DB Hammer stuff was all the rage, and that was I still remember this. I had a guy who was grilling me. He was a nice guy, another trainer, but grilling me, asking me questions about this and because he was a big fan of this stuff. And I remember asking me about what's the time of the amortization phase on our plyos when we're doing plyos? Is it 0.2 milliseconds on the rebound phase? I'm thinking, I'm just happy if these guys show up not hungover and like, what are you talking about? Like, they don't know which ones are the dumbbells and which ones are the barbells. I don't know. I don't know what I don't know what the amortization. Are you kidding right now? Like, I read that book too. It was really cool, but I don't do that.
Yeah.
I don't train that guy. So you're 100% right about that. And I think that's again, getting your ego out of the way, and it doesn't matter what you like or what you're interested in. It's what this athlete needs, and maybe goblet squats is all he needs to get him to the next level.
Absolutely, yeah.
I don't think anybody ever really still found out who that person was. It was it was a mystery.
Were you at that conference that Verkhoshansky and were you at that one? Tom Maslinski was there and Buddy was there.
Is that the Vegas
Val and the Sedka? That's legendary.
Yeah, that was a very interesting.
But see, but however, I would say, like, and this is circling back to something you said earlier. Before there was Instagram and before there was Twitter, you had to do things like this, and you had to go to things like Swiss, and you had to go to the shittiest, worst seminar ever in the history of seminars. But but you know what? When I was at that shitty, ridiculously awful seminar, I got to be friends with Milo.
Yeah.
That's worth 1,000 times the price of my admission to the seminar. The seminar was, famously bad, but I got a lifelong friend in Milo, right? So, I mean, there's a million other things but you would have to find a way, and you already have that aura still today, but back in the day, you were not exactly a warm, fuzzy, cuddly, approachable person, right?
Yeah, I grew up a little bit.
But as a young person in the gym, there was no Instagram, there was no Twitter. So you know what? You had to like sit in the corner, and when Dave wasn't looking, kind of watch what he's doing without letting him see that you're watching. And then when you leave, I go try to do the same thing and try to figure out, maybe I can talk to, maybe I can work my courage up to talk to this guy. Mm-hmm. He'll tell me something, maybe. But you had to actually go and interact with other people. You had to have enough social skills to do that. You had to have enough courage to do that, you know. And I think that that's something that's missing now. And I think that, you know, you're talking about reading the textbooks from Tutor. Yeah, 99% of that probably is over your head. But it's the process of trying to find that information that's gone now.
Yeah,
I can just go on TikTok and watch what that guy's doing.
Yeah, for me, all those, even if it was super training or that, it always led to having to ask somebody else to help fill in the blanks. And for me, you know, it was Mel, you know, so I could ask the author to fill in the blanks. And it was because I can read it 100 times, you know, and I can find the old one out here. Pages are falling out of it. There's highlighted, and you know, I got a whole notebook of notes from that I was taking on. And then you would find, because there's always gaps, you know, I was like, what the hell is this? And it would drive me absolutely insane. Because even if I wasn't going to use it, I wanted to at least understand it, you know. And I remember in super training, there's like 4 or 5 pages on how to have a training log, right? And it's pretty fucking extensive, right? And so I did it. I mean, that's like tracking every % of the training session. So you would know, here's the workload at 70% range, 80% range, 90% range, workload volume, all this of each training day. Then what percentage of the training day constituted that? Mm-hmm. Like, and it's like, oh my God, this is so mind numbing, but I have to do it. You know, so I did this for, oh God, long, like 5 months. Then I did, Mel used to have those things at his house. I don't know if you ever went.
Did you? No, I didn't. You did that?
Yeah, I did a couple with him, you know, so I would do the squat, bench, and deadlift, and he'd do the Olympic lifts, and everybody would stay in his basement.
Yeah.
Right. And then he would, oh God, he would like wake us up in the night. He barked. Right. He didn't have a dog, but we'd all wake up in the middle of the night because of the pool. Dog barking. Oh yeah, I'd do the pool too. Like the dog barking. And then we find out later it was him.
Oh geez.
You know, just doing this barking shit. And I was so scared the first time I went, because I'm presenting my original West Side Conjugate type thing. And I'm like, oh fuck. I mean, this is like Mel Siff, and then the other people that paid to be there are not dumb. I'm like trying to like make this as simple as I can. So, and then afterwards, you know, I asked him like, you know, how did I do? Like, what did I fuck up? I was using words back then like cybernetic periodization, right? You know, and so he pointed out some shit like that, but he said, overall, all the rest of it's just dead on. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. You know, I'm kind of onto something. This is a funny story. I did another one where it was on Thanksgiving, right? He's a vegan. And so we get there, and he's, God, you said the pools. This is what reminded me of that. He's going to make Thanksgiving dinner for us. So he has the frozen turkey, and he put it on a rope, and he dropped it in the hot tub. And this was to thaw it, right? And this was like 2 hours before he was going to make the thing, right? So he goes about that, and, you know, we're doing all of our other stuff. And then we're eating kind of like raw fucking turkey. I don't know if it was even
nothing's
cooked.
Better than rare turkey.
And then there was like potatoes that were out of a can, and then corn, you know, and all I'm doing is just mixing the shit on my plate because I can't eat it. And then somebody made a run, like when he went to bed, somebody made a run to McDonald's and came back with like 50 cheeseburgers. It was the greatest. But he had this, he had a hot tub that had to be 10 foot deep, and it had rails that you would have to hold on to these rails. And then his swimming pool was basically an ice bath. Oof. So it was the contrast. That was when I was first introduced to restoration methods. And that was a long conversation, because it's like, well, how can I institute contrast, you know, therapy and, steam sauna, and we had all in pine baths and all this different shit. I mean, there's so much shit. And then what stood out to me with that was when he told me your body can adapt to these recovery modalities the same way it does training. So if you do the same thing over and over again, it's not going to work the same. So you need to basically conjugate it. You need to rotate it and then find the ones that work best and save those just for before the competition, like the last 5 weeks. Don't use them any other time. Then use the off season to try all kinds of different stuff. And like, cool, this is like what we do with max effort work and other special exercises and stuff like that. But those were great little symposiums or whatever you want to call it, because it was one-to-one interaction with him. And he was eccentric, but the people that were coming were also amazing, because I only went to 2. I can't remember one person that I would look at and be like, what the hell are you doing here? He knew it. Now, when it came to the Olympic shit, I didn't give a fuck.
It's funny. Over the summer, I'd gone to Friends University to do a seminar with Coach Joe over there, and they brought Cal Dietz in. And so like I've been following what Cal's been doing for years and years and years. And it came to my segment and I adjusted based on the fact of like filling in blanks. So I was kind of like the go-between guy, the bridge guy. So one of my presentations was on like understanding loading on a squat and like how to change from like a goblet and like when to use that versus a front squat versus it. And I was like, this is the simplest shit ever. I feel so dumb. I don't know why I'm in the room. Everybody hates me. Cal comes up to me after, he goes, I think I'm going to make more videos on how to squat. I was like, shut the fuck up. I was like, okay, that's fine. But it just goes to show is like sometimes the simple stuff is just people have a tendency of overshooting, trying to be as complicated as possible. And then like the simple stuff kind of boils down to like this shit works.
Well, I think a lot of coaches and I was going that direction until Mel, I mean, he was a mentor. I mean, kind of corrected.
Yeah.
Where you're using bigger words than you should.
Right.
Because you're trying to impress the people in the room or whatever it's going to be. And he was able to just drill this in, like just keep this as simple as you possibly can. They're not going to remember most of what you say anyhow. Mm-hmm. They're going to remember like 2 things, 3 things at the most. So just harp on the 2 or 3 things that you want. Keep it really simple. You're not impressing anybody.
Right.
And that just resonated because I held him at this super, super high standard. And in the industry at the time, and it still happens today, but at the industry at the time, everybody else is going the other direction. Like, well, this lift should be 82% of this lift, which should be 40% of this lift. And you're like, the fuck does that mean? And meanwhile, when you get down into the weeds of it, if you're weak at that thing, make that thing stronger.
And it's funny you say that because after that presentation, I had a couple coaches come up to me. They were like, I work with middle school and high school kids, and they're really struggling at the bottom of a squat. And I was like, have you tried using like a box, like limiting their range of motion? They're like, no. How would you do that? I was like, oh, you just put the box there and have them squat to that box before shit goes south and then just kind of build it up over time. They're like, I never thought of that. I was
Did you have any moments kind of like what I'm talking about here where
tons.
What are a couple of them?
Tons and tons. Like I would say, I mean, first of all, this goes back to the difference between now and then and what's happened in strength. Like a lot of strength coaches that I see coming now into the business, they don't lift or they can't lift, right? And I think that there was a period of time where, and there's good and bad to everything. I think there was a period of time where probably there was a little bit of every coach is doing the same program that they did because that's the same program someone else gave them. And there's a lot of bro science probably, but most of the strength, if you were a strength coach, you probably knew how to squat. Maybe you did it too often, but you knew how to do it. You probably knew how to clean and bench. Maybe you put a little too much emphasis on it, but you knew how to do it, right? And I think because there wasn't this, social media, internet culture, you probably had to spend some time under the iron. You probably had to spend some time with another coach or mentor that would actually show you this stuff. So I think that's something that we lost along the way. But I think I've done that for sure with, I think, it was funny. I bought every book you sold. There was a period of time where you didn't have a single book that I didn't buy.
Yes, all the Russian manuals.
Yeah, I've got all of them. Yeah. And it was funny. I remember doing my master's again with Tudor, and I would come in so proud of this thing that I had read on the weekend. I was going to show him and I remember him one time saying, he said, Matt, you have to stop with this. You have to stop. He goes, it's not 1965. You're not in the Soviet Union. If you want to build a time machine and go back to the Soviet Union and do this is great. He said, but you have to remember back then, we didn't have TV and MTV and video games and McDonald's, and you're either going to become an Olympic athlete, a soldier, or you're going to go work in the factory. Those are your three options. So we could train, and if we took 1,000 kids in, we could crush 950 of them, like physically crush them, as well as mentally and emotionally crush them, as long as we churned out 50, and of those 50, 5 become champions, then we're doing the right thing. But you can't do that. You can't run that program. So I think there was moments like that along the way, and I still do that every time. I still buy every friggin' book that comes out, and my wife, my wife goes crazy because it's like,
I'm the same way.
Really? Like, do you need, like, what are you reading now? You have 8,000 books. Like, is there some new thing that like?
Well, sometimes because I do the same thing. I mean, you can see in the lobby, there's thousands of books out there. Is you can skim read most of it, and it might remind you of one thing, that you didn't know, or that you did know, but you completely forgot about. Most of the time, it's just, there's nothing in there that's really of any value because you've already kind of digested it all. But if that one thing that it reminds you of is like, then that can be a game changer because you're so far removed from some things sometimes.
Well, I'll give you, and I am going to get back to the question, but I'll say one thing actually just popped up before we started this. I was taking a tour through this incredible facility and looking at all your stuff. I think about my first year working in the NHL, one of the first things I did is I said, I need to revamp this weight room. And I remember when I took the job, Pat Quinn was our coach at the time, an incredible mentor. And he said, we need these guys to, our injuries were a little higher than they should be. And we couldn't quite, very good team, very talented team, but a bit of an older team that were getting kind of tired and worn out and beat up by the time the playoffs came around. He said, we need these guys stronger. They need to be training through the year. He knew enough. He didn't know anything about what to do, but he knew that it should be done. And he said, I think, it's your job to get these guys in there and get the training. I said, okay, that's great. And I went in and I saw the facility and I said, well, we've got dumbbells up to 45 pounds and a leg extension and a leg curl and a total hip and a bunch of bikes. So I said, even if I can get all these guys in here training, what the hell are they going to do?
You have a hotel gym.
Yeah. So we revamped that. But at the time, one of the first things I did is said, we're going to get rid of this leg extension first thing, because this is non-functional. This is terrible. And, shear forces and all these sorts of things and it's funny now that I've opened this new facility, and one of the first, I've been searching long and hard to get the perfect leg extension machine, because we do a ton of ACL rehabs, right? And and a lot of times we'll get clients who don't train with us, who train with other great trainers, other great coaches, trainers, but they sustain an injury and they'll come to our gym to do the rehab. And I remember having this conversation with Mick Hughes, who's I follow on Instagram. He's a great follow for me, but I remember talking to him. He's, ACL rehab is his thing. That's his bread and butter. And it was interesting to speak to someone who's not from our culture, different, different continent, different mentors, different environment there. And he was fascinated that you wouldn't use that exercise or that type of a movement for a post-surgical rehab when you've got a very clear, and at the time I was having this, not argument, but discussion with him. And he's like, you've got a very, very clear and obvious atrophy in this muscle. This is an exercise that isolates that muscle and allows you can create hypertrophy doing it. And he's like, but he wasn't trying to be argumentative. Yeah. He's like, I don't understand.
Confused.
Explain to me why you wouldn't isolate. And I had this guest on your show the other day, but Mike Van Wyck. So I've helped Mike a little bit with some rehab stuff, which that to me, like that's something that I think was really, Mike was so impressive to me for a bunch of reasons. Number one, like you, he could walk around and not listen to anybody else. Because most rooms that you walk into, you're the strongest guy. Most rooms that Mike walks into, he's the biggest guy in the room. There's no reason for him to listen to somebody like me. What the hell would I know, right? But I think in the case of rehab, he's very clear about, okay, look, I've got this very specific issue. From what I gather, I've talked to a bunch of people, you're good with rehab. Can you please help me with this specific issue? I don't need you to tell me how to live my life and be my guru, and just help me with this specific issue. In our conversations, it's become apparent to me. It's funny that there are so many people in my industry or my end of the industry, or whatever, that would never listen to a guy like you or a guy like Mike. These guys are meatheads. What would they know? Well, if you have atrophy in a muscle because of an injury or surgery, who knows more about hypertrophy, than you or Mike, or say maybe Mike in that case. And then when that person is now healed, but they're weak. Most of the physiotherapists that I know who are outstanding. I don't want to bash on any profession. I rely on them all the time. Have no concept of loading parameters.
Yeah.
And I don't care if you're doing
or tempo or contraction or position.
I don't care if it's rubber tubing with an 80-year-old, stay-at-home grandma or squatting 1,000 pounds. Those loading parameters are the same. They don't change. The weight on the bar might change, the exercise might change, but the science is the same. So why wouldn't they listen? Like, I've learned more about rehab from guys like you and Ken Kanakin and Mauro Di Pasquale and Eric than most of the sports science, sports medicine folks that I know.
I think it's a part of that is, obviously bias would be one part of that, but maybe they don't know how to process it, because if you ask Mike, you ask me, you ask, a meathead that comes from that, your assumption, if you're asking a question, isn't that you're going to do exactly what we're saying. You're going to take it, you're going to process it, and assimilate it, and then include what you can use with who you're working with. Where when I've spoken to other professionals about things like that, they don't do that. It's like, because they think that they need, if I'm just tell them to do something, that's exactly how it has to be done. So I think that's one part of it, where they just think we're all idiots or steroids or all these other things. But, Mike is one I'm going to follow really close, because I've needed a shoulder replacement since 2004, but haven't, because the outcomes are not good, but from what I saw from him, where he is now post-op, I'm reconsidering my decision. Let's just put it that way. But I need to wait. It's not been long enough yet to be able to see, but his range of motion has exceeded what I've seen with anybody else that's had a replacement.
Because this is the full credit to Mike. He puts his ego completely on the side. Tell me exactly what to do. I will do exactly that. If you tell me not to do something, I will not do it. And it's funny, I helped him with a hip issue they had, previous, but that was the same thing. As soon as he was cleared, it was like, okay, thanks. Have a great life. I don't need your, I'm going to go back to doing what I do. I don't need you to give me the next 6 months of training in my life. I know exactly what I need this for. He's ultra disciplined. And that to me was that was a great, when someone comes to you as a rehab person or a coach, you're supposed to be it's supposed to be a one-way street of you delivering information and guidance and coaching. I learned as much from that experience as well. Because
I can say the same thing happens on the other side, though. You can take lifters or bodybuilders from that discipline that could benefit a lot just from listening to strength coaches or people that know more about the rehab to implement into their training, but they won't do that either.
No, 100%. No, absolutely. So it works both ways for sure.
That's where, that's what I've always loved about Swiss, is because you're integrating all these different disciplines, so even if I always tell anybody that goes, sit in a room that you normally wouldn't sit in, a stream, sit in one of the streams you normally wouldn't be. If you normally don't go to the therapy one, go to the therapy one. Just don't go to the one, don't spend all day in the strength and conditioning one. If that's what you do, go to the other ones, just expand your horizons a little bit, because we're all people, right? And nothing happens in isolation. So you can have the best strength and conditioning program in the world, but if you can't communicate, it isn't worth a fuck. Yep. If the nutrition is fucked up, it's not good. If your function's bad, then how much hypertrophy are you really going to get? Or how great will your strength be displayed if there's dysfunction?
100%.
So you can't assume that if it's just that strength person, that they're going to know function. They're going to know function of the lift, the ones that they're specializing in, but not the body, which is where been around long enough now, I can see that's where most of the injuries happen that end careers is, decades and decades. And then all of a sudden, it's something they can't come back from.
Yeah. And again, I'm still obviously in the world of coaching and whatnot. And one of the things I see a lot with younger coaches is they'll take a class or read a book, and then all of their athletes and clients are doing that thing, right? It's just this big shift. And it really boils down to we don't know what we don't know. So Dave had a great point with jumping into those different streams. And it's just gain a broader insight into what's going on. Right. You may not know exactly the reason behind things, but just to know, it provides the opportunity to ask better questions. right? And have better conversations. It's been one of the biggest things that's helped me personally is to put myself in those rooms where I'm like, I don't know what the fuck's going on here, but man, those are a lot of things I have no idea what they are,
That's the best part to me about Swiss. Because you'll see a guy like I'll still remember there's a good buddy of mine, again, a guy who's, pivotal in my career, a guy by the name of Rory Mullen in Toronto. We used to run a business together, trained a ton of football players up in Toronto and Canada for, I don't know, maybe about almost 15 years. He was the therapist for the Toronto Raptors, the NBA team. I would see every time I'd go to Swiss, him and Bill Cat. Now Rory is probably 5'8" and 140 pounds soaking wet on a good day. And I'd see him and Bill Kazmaier holed up in the corner of the room for 2 hours talking, going through Bill's, who knows what Bill's, energy medicine or whatever he's into, and Rory's then
it changes.
But you know what I mean? Like it's crazy. Like that's the best part about this weekend for me, is that I see guys like you who will listen to a guy who's 5'8" and 140 pounds, because you don't necessarily want his opinion on how to squat or deadlift, but he might tell you one thing, one little rehab tip that takes you to the next level. Mm-hmm. And if those therapists, some of them are smart enough, that's one thing to my credit, to listen to guys like you and guys like Ken and guys, I take one concept and again, apply that, like whatever, if you explained your training that took your squat from 900 to 1,000, I can apply that same concept to external rotations with a piece of TheraBand tubing. It's the same concept, right? And get that 75-year-old lady that can't reach and grab a jar off the shelf, get her back to be able to do that with the same fundamental science that you use to squat 900 to 1,000 for her to be able to reach up and grab that jar off the shelf. The same concept.
With the functional issues that you've worked with over the period of time, how is it? Are they the same today as they were, say, 10 years ago?
No, I would say, because I think in general, and it shouldn't happen that fast. Like 10 years really isn't that much time in the grand scheme of things. But I see in general, people and specifically kids are just a lot more inactive. They're just things that, like, when I first started in this business, I took it for granted that kids could maybe they're not going to be elite, but they're all going to be able to do a few chin-ups, knock off, 20 push-ups, skipping. I don't know if you like.
Oh yeah,
kids can't skip rope now.
No,
they can't. Like I don't mean well, or for long periods of time. I mean, they're incapable of doing it. I don't know how that's a thing. Now, we had something in Canada called the Canadian Standard Test of Fitness. I think you called it the presidential something, whatever. Mm-hmm. And I remember my brother was like a marathon runner. He still does triathlons and all this. A very super fit guy. I was a speed power guy, which when you're in elementary school is useless.
Mm-hmm.
Then football comes around, but I remember that every kid in the school, you'd had to do a flexed arm hang. You had to hang from that chin bar, a 90-degree isometric hang for, I don't know whatever it was, a minute, whatever. Mm-hmm. Every kid could do it. Some couldn't do it well.
Right.
Every kid could run a couple laps of the track. Some did great, some didn't do great, but they could all do it.
They all could do it.
Yeah. I think there's something's been lost there for sure. So I think when we talk about functional training, I mean, what's functional now? For kids that just sit and play video games, or even a lot of the athletes. I think before, like, I can at least speak to hockey, it's become so specialized, which in some ways is great, because we've got, I've got a lot of clients that I've had from game 0 in the NHL past game 1,000, which I'm really very proud of. I'd like to think that I'd hope that everyone who comes to see me, I can make them faster and stronger and whatever, but if we're all being honest, they all come into my gym, they're already pretty genetically special people.
Yeah.
But if I can keep them healthy and keep them playing for a long period of time, we've had some of these guys come in at 15 or 16 and play until they're in their 30s. But I would say that, when I see now, we've got, kids that are 17 or 18, they have skill levels beyond what my 30, 31, 32-year-old pro athletes have. They just, because it's so specialized. They've got specialized skill trainers. They're watching stuff on YouTube and TikTok and Instagram. They're practicing it, but they're not as good generally athletically. They're not resilient. They're lesser athletes, but they have a greater level of sport specific skill. So I think that when you talk about functional training, I think for some of those kids, sometimes it actually comes back to they just need some basic strength. They need some basic athleticism.
Well, one of the things that interests me the most, if I have, a top power lifter on the podcast or top bodybuilders, which I've had, I want to know what they did when they were, from 4 to 14, right? Because there's certain abilities that it can be developed during the visual acuity, explosiveness, endurance, all that. There's windows, there's opportunity, specific windows of time to be able to develop these things. And I've yet to speak to any of them or any professional athlete that didn't cover those during that time period.
Yeah.
Right. So if that's not done, then any aspirations they have to be, and they won't because they're 4, or 6 or whatever it's going to be. So it kind of falls on the parents, but it's not impossible, for them to still make it to that higher level, but they're compromised
100%
big time, especially for me, like the visual acuity is a huge one, right? And I don't know if video games is covering that or not. I went down a rabbit hole once because there's a lot of shit going on. And if it's a big TV, maybe, I don't know. I haven't delved into any research or asked anybody that question, but I don't know. But when you start, I use a linebacker or a quarterback as an example. I mean, a linebacker, you got a face mask, you got this shit, and you got to see what's going on like that. Immediately. You got 2 seconds to figure out what the fuck's going on and pick that up. And if you can't, I didn't have that because I didn't have that younger, well, then you're a lineman.
Right.
Because now it's, so there's a determining factor based upon, did a kid play baseball? Or just different skills that kids should, I'm just harping what everybody else knows. They should do multiple sports when they're younger. If the parents really want to be like hyper focused, then develop those motor abilities when they're at their highest capacity.
Well, great book that I again purchased from you. Joseph Drabick's book.
Yeah.
That's
perfect.
Yeah. There's development since then, but anyone who's training youth athletes should have that book for sure. You should read it multiple times. But there's a difference between learning how to hit a moving object with an implement like a bat or a hockey stick versus, hitting a stationary object with a bat or an implement, or a hockey stick. Learning how to kick or strike with your foot versus your hand. There's optimal windows for speed development versus endurance development. There's some science around that, and I'm not saying that, the science has surpassed what was in that book that was probably written, I don't know, 50 years ago, but that's a great book for anybody.
Still a starting point.
Oh, fantastic. Right? Absolutely.
Most people aren't even aware.
No, everyone should read that book for sure.
It's just having the awareness of that, if you have kids, or you're around kids, it's huge.
But do you not is this just, I mean, I'm not sure, but I think we're of the similar vintage. Like my parents were not athletes. That was not their thing. Right? And so there was zero pressure on me to do it. And there was zero pressure, and there certainly was no specialized sports skill coaches, but I played Red Rover and British Bulldog every day at recess and tackle football, and we climbed trees and did stuff. And
that's what I was going to say is just,
you played on every team that there was.
You played.
Yeah. You played on all those teams.
I think cause I'm 34. I think I was probably one of the last generations that had the parents that go outside. I don't want to see you until it's dark. And it's like, you're making stuff up with the other kids in the neighborhood. Yeah. It's like, if we had a ball, it's like we had limitless games we could play. Yeah. Like we were either hitting it with sticks or just beaming it at each other as hard as we can and having to dodge it. But even games like tag, like think about understanding where your hands are in space and your body and avoiding things. It's just something that's so beneficial.
And we still do that. I mean, if you go on my Instagram page, you'd have to scroll back a little bit, but I play tag with 32-year-old professional athletes because it develops all those same abilities, and a lot of times we do it because they didn't do it or they're not doing it. That's so sometimes it's just that basic stuff, and that transcends into the gym too. Like, I get as excited about anybody else with the new latest and greatest things, but it's those basic things that, that's
some of the basic things when you go like flag football as a kid, you're teaching them to watch the hips instead of the head. That's getting faked out or not, it's those simple things that are in there.
Even doing like a warm up, like I would have my groups when I was out here, my football guys like warming up with a volleyball. It's like, all right, we got to keep it up 50 times.
Love it.
And it's like this team versus this team is like, you're trying to compete, but you're still trying to hit, you know what I mean? So you're bouncing, you're diving, you're moving in different planes of motion.
And you watch some, I mean, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but you watch, I mean, watch their faces when you bring out that volleyball.
Oh, they light up.
Watch them light up. Their eyes open up. They're smiling. They're talking shit. But they're talking to each other. Their arousal level. If you were monitoring, if you had your, you know, whatever your Whoop band, or if you're doing your Omega Wave or whatever you're into this week, right? Through the roof. Mm-hmm. Now, you could accomplish the same heart rate zones and the same movement patterns by saying, everybody get in a line. We are now going to swing our legs to the left. Like, and I do all of that too, mm-hmm. right? But I'm a huge advocate for that. Huge. For that reason right there.
And you'll also notice that they even try harder. Oh, it's so competitive. When
if you watch some, again, there's a couple of old videos on my page there. I've got these guys, and like in this tag game, in the end zone of this football field, we probably got $100 million worth of salary running around there. And these guys, it's like they're 7 years old again.
Yeah,
they're screaming and laughing, and they're talking shit and trash talking each other. And, you know, we'll do things, we'll take them out and do drills in the sand or beach volleyball. Okay. For everyone who's freaking, we are still squatting, and we are still cleaning. Just save it, right? We're doing all that stuff too. But we do this stuff, and you watch, like, when we do that, they'll go. I mean, I don't know. I've never been to your session, but I bet when it's time to work, it's like, you got to tear them away from it.
Oh, absolutely.
I've never had to tear anybody away from the assault bike, or tear anybody away from the pylons running around, and tear them away from the ladder drill. We've had times where we do this, a little bit of sand training, then we'll have a beach volleyball game at the end. The guy at the facility is like, hey, there's another group here. You need to get the hell out. Like, these guys won't stop because it's tiebreaker and there's pride on the line. And I'm not like, this matters. Like, they're diving for loose balls and killing themselves. Like, that's something it's kind of tough to quantify. But that's everything that has to do with, like, elite athletics. And those are the guys, you all know those athletes that maybe they weren't the strongest, fastest guy, but they just, when it's fourth and goal on the one for the championship, that guy's just going to make it happen because they compete. Those are the guys that you want, guys and girls that you want. You want those people that compete.
Well, I think it's also filling a void where it's fun.
Yeah,
right. Where
for sure.
If they're in the league for a long enough period of time, it's a job.
Yes.
Right. It's a job. So, and it's a grind. Even I can say the same thing with powerlifters after a certain period of time. It's not always fun. It's just a grind. But now you throw something in there, which kind of reminds them of what the game was like when they first started, and then that reignites, it has to reignite, what's going to transfer over to the ice field or whatever.
You just sparked a memory for me right now. When we sat 20 years ago-ish, when we sat and had that lunch, you were talking about, you were still competing at the time, but I remember you said to me, the day that I stopped competing, I will never squat, bench press, or deadlift ever again.
Yeah.
But it's
deadlift has been true.
Yeah.
It's funny because I went through a period not long after that where, and I don't know if either of you, I mean, I think you've been through that. I don't know if you're there yet, but I used to love it. And I used to love training, and I used to love, like, squatting. Like, everyone who gets excited about bench day that wasn't me. I got excited about squat day. Mm-hmm. I remember there was a day that I was just, you get underneath that bar, and I'm halfway through my workout, and I'm just thinking, why am I doing this? This hurts. I just, like, I'm not, like, the weight is embarrassing. Like, this used to be my warm up weight. It's crushing me right now. No one cares what I look like. No one cares how much weight I can lift. And I remember on that day, I said, okay, you know what? I'm not doing any of those things again. And I picked 3 different exercises that I had no emotional attachment to.
Yeah.
I had no idea what a good number was in that exercise. So I just sat down and wrote my program, planned it out, and had unbelievable results. Because for the first time, I don't know what's good for this exercise. Yeah. And I'm excited because I'm getting better at it. And it's fun. I'm not beating myself up because I'm using that weight. I think that's something that aspect of, I don't know if fun is the right word, but all the time, because it is training, but having some enjoyment of the process too.
Well, that was a huge, what you just said was huge for me when I was done competing, right? And I went through different phases to try to figure out, because it was my identity, so I went through these bodybuilding things and shit just to try to figure out what the fuck I was going to do. But once I got through that identity crisis, which lasted half a decade, then it was, I'm going to go back to training kind of like the strength training. The bodybuilding just didn't do shit for me, but I'm not going to do anything that I know how strong I was at. I'm going to avoid that. Now I can, because I just don't care. And I'm just weaker and shit compared to what I was. I'm mature enough to be able to deal with that now, but I couldn't deal with it before. So it's like, how can we conjugate the shit out of this, so I don't know what it is, reverse band, chain, kettlebells hanging on the freaking thing, some bar and on a incline. I don't know what's good. And then don't train with anybody could potentially beat you at what you're doing, and that's kind of how I progressed, over the time. But I've not deadlifted since off the floor. I have pulled off like blocks, but that's just stupid shit. The bench, I have a love-hate relationship with. It just hurts. So it's fuck the bench. I think we just did this the other day, the fuck, marry, kill thing.
Yep.
The squat I love, man. So I've always found a way to kind of like keep the squat in there, but I've not done a fucking reverse hyper since and never ever will again. I don't care if I had to do it to save my life. I would just rather die. That was like, because that was the one thing I did, because Louis was huge on that. There were sometimes I was doing it 16 times a week. I mean, it was insane how many reverse hypers I did, all the different variations. Yeah. It solved everything to him. You got fucking cold, do reverse hypers. You're going to breathe hard, and you're going to hack it up, whatever it's going to be. Not one. If I have to demonstrate it, it's like, Sam, can you get up here? Somebody else, just jump up there. I'll fix it while you're doing it. No, done. Just done. And, yeah, they suck too, because it's hard to breathe on them. So there was that whole thing too. I don't know if I'm ever going to get away from the squat. The way I've justified that is the sit to stand, because I've had enough surgeries and enough issues that's
functional training.
The first thing they teach you is to sit to the end of the bed, and that's it, to stand. I'm like, fuck, box squat. I can always, you're going to love where I'm going to go here. I can always do this. So when it comes to the time for me to die, I'm going to sit to the end of the bed, right? And I'm going to stand up, raise my blood pressure, and I'm going to die on my feet. But at least I'm always going to have that skill to be able to do a box squat, to be able to do that. That one, it will always be there in some fashion. I can actually say for myself personally, if I couldn't squat, I don't know if I would train at all, which is fucked up. But my whole training revolves around that. Dave Kirshen, who I just had out, hasn't lifted since he retired from powerlifting.
Wow.
So he kind of did what I said I was going to do, wasn't able to do it.
Well, his comment on the deadlift was brilliant. That's a bench handoff that doesn't go anywhere. Yeah. And it's funny because I'm still competing and I'm, still enjoying the process. But I was talking to Dave earlier today about sometimes it's like at 34, it's like I'm getting up now and it's like, oh, nothing hurts. Some days I'm like, why the fuck does this hurt? Like I didn't do anything to it. I was like, now it's just an odd place to be, because mentally I'm still in my head, I'm like 25, 22, whatever. But it is that realization that this shit isn't going to last forever.
Well, that brings up a good question for you, because the athletes you're working with are going to be dealing with pain just from practice games and stuff like that. So how do you disseminate between that, like pain and bad pain? All pain's bad, right? But there's a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I rely heavily, like our medical staff that we have in our facility. Dr. Mike Prebeg's a chiropractor that kind of leads his group of soft tissue people there, and a guy by the name of Dr. Sean Kings, who's an MD chiropractor, doctor of Chinese medicine. Pretty incredible combo for one person to have, like that pretty broad spectrum of understanding. But I rely heavily on them, and we actually have the luxury of doing some diagnostics for sure, just to make sure, because pain is a tricky thing. You can have people that have debilitating pain, and it's really, there's not a significant you can have phantom limb pain, and you can have pain in a limb that doesn't exist anymore. So that's that centrally generated idea of pain. And you have a lot of times we've got other athletes who aren't reporting any pain. They're not complaining about anything, but there's some serious issues underlying there. So I think establishing that relationship with the person, that relationship of trust, and having them understand that, if there is pain in your shoulder, knee, whatever it is, we're still going to train. Don't worry about, like, it's me. Like, I'm the, in your world, I'm softer than puppy shit, but in my world, I'm the hardcore meathead hockey guy, so you're here for a reason, probably because me, and you look, our clients are, they're a little rough around the edges in the hockey world. We've got some guys that are some rough and rugged guys. So, we're going to train. So don't get that out of your head. So but you need to be honest with me, because I know I can get you there. It may not be one of these, and there's some times where it's the middle of August and we huddle up as a staff and we're thinking, okay, this rehab is going well, but this he's got to play NHL hockey or NBA basketball, or we got to find some way to pull a rabbit out of a hat with all sorts of modified ranges and partial box squats and ISOs and rack pulls and whatever we can do to cheat it on either end of the spectrum, right? But I think, again, it comes back to that relationship and having the athlete understand that if we try to cut corners now, you're never going to get back to where you need to. So we'll spend all day. We'll see you guys 3 times a day if we have to do whatever we have to do, even if it means, and I tell them, you have to trust me, like, even if it means that we're 2 weeks away from training camp and everybody else is like throwing weights around and running till they puke, or assault bike riding till they puke and skating hard, and you're still doing your rehab shit, please trust the process. As soon as your body is ready and good to go, the conditioning to me is the easiest part for pro sports. That's the easy stuff. If you're willing to put the work in, the speed, is a little trickier, and the strength a little trickier, but so those things are important. But we use every modality. We've got, electroacupuncture and, every soft tissue trick in the book, and nutritional interventions and biomedical interventions and all that sort of stuff. So
that reminds me of something that Charles used to say years ago with the conditioning, and that, it's a lot of athletes in the off season were spending too much time doing like the conditioning work, where it really only took 4 to 6 weeks to get that back to their baseline.
If that,
so to just not do that and focus on the weak points, the injuries, and all that other kind of stuff, and then reintroduce that later instead of trying to keep it in all the time.
Well, I'm sorry, are you speaking now about, is that Charles?
Well, that
or
Charlie.
Okay,
right? Yeah.
Because I spent, probably the first 2 years of my professional career with Charlie Francis, at least twice, sometimes 3 days a week, sitting there. It would be myself, that other fellow I mentioned, Rory Mullen, the therapist of the Toronto Raptors, and Charlie Francis, hanging out 2 to 3 days a week for 2 years. And that was the one thing he's like, remember him, that always stuck with me. He said, hockey players love doing medium.
Yeah.
They love all the medium stuff. He said they don't work hard enough. They don't run fast enough to get fast. They don't lift heavy enough to get strong, and they don't rest enough to actually recover.
Yeah.
They live in this middle zone, right? And he said, if you could actually just get them to do one or the other, he said, in an ideal world, you could get them to sprint as fast as they need to, or whether that's on a track or on the ice, lift as heavy or as explosively as they need to, and rest, like actually rest and recover as much as they need to. And he said, if you can't, that would be in an ideal world, you can get them to do these. If you can't, he said, even if you can just get them to do this one, they'll be out of shape, but they'll be able to do what they need to do. And I remember him saying, when I said, it's funny because after I did that work with Tudor and had my whole year planned out, my first year, I sat with Charlie and he laughed and looked at it. He said, you know what? He goes, I bet you if you had a team that just never practiced all year long, they'd probably have the greatest chance of winning the championship. Because they'll be out of shape and deconditioned, but at least they'll feel good. Yeah. They won't go out there limping onto the field or onto the ice.
Yeah, his work is another rabbit hole people should go down.
Oh, absolutely.
I believe that I haven't been to the website because I already have all the ebooks that are there, but I think that if it may still be available. I mean, you could buy the whole forum. At some point, I think they put the whole Charlie Francis forum in an ebook format, which is thousands of pages, but there's a lot of material in there
and brilliant. But it's no different than you and Louis and the things that you did and him. People, they miss the forest for the trees. Mm-hmm. And they see one thing that doesn't resonate with their value system or their moral code or their belief system or their formal education, and discount all the rest of it, you know? Where if you look at, like, he was a world-class manual therapist. He had incredible hands. This guy was, I mean, you could forget, if you want to get into politics and everything else, this guy was, this brilliant guy, but he was so, you talked about this with Mel Siff, so advanced with recovery modalities.
Yes.
So forget about if the sprinting or the heavy lifting doesn't appeal to you, or you think that that's wrong or whatever, focus on the recovery aspect. That's the one thing I think, like, I remember I was one of those guys that, I tried Westside, shit doesn't work. But I didn't do the recovery stuff because I'm busy. Like I did the stuff I wanted to do. I did the cool stuff.
Yeah.
All the recovery stuff, I won't do that stuff. I want dynamic effort day. It's good, but I can go a little heavier.
Yeah.
I could do a little bit more on dynamic effort. Like, so I think that so many people miss the forest for the trees. Mm-hmm. And if you took Charlie's science or your science and apply it to whatever it is you're doing, I think they get caught up in the fact, like, at the time that Charlie was talking about sprinters because that's who he worked with.
Yeah.
Louis was talking about squats and bench, but because that's his sport.
Mm-hmm.
He's not talking about squats and bench presses for a tennis player. The sport was squats and bench presses. What if you switch squats to forehand and bench press to wrist shot, like that? Like, apply that same concept to your training. I think that's something I think that gets missed a lot.
Yeah, I think as we kind of come in close for a landing here, I would love to hear, and this is a thing that as a coach, I am so just enamored by. I would love to hear some of the stories that you have of some of the just freak athletes that have done amazing, like the most impressive thing that you've seen NHL guys do or football guys do in the weight room, because there's sometimes just freaks on the ice and freaks in the weight room. And sometimes those worlds kind of collide. I'd love to hear if you had some examples of that.
Man, I was telling this story yesterday to somebody about, I remember there's a guy by the name of a client of mine for a long time. It was a guy named Orlando Franklin. He was the right tackle for the Denver Broncos and then went to San Diego after that. And he was one of these guys that every time I'd give him something to do, he would just give it to me. And I'd say, listen, like, you don't have to do it. You can, like, you're paying to be here. Like, why are you yelling at me? You're like, this guy's 6'6", 340 pounds. Like, I'm powerless to stop you. You can, like, do whatever you want to do. But I remember one time asking him to pass me a medicine ball. There was a 12-pound Dynamax med ball on the ground. And he reached down, picked it up like a tennis ball and threw it to me. That was one of the craziest things. And the only reason I brought that was because I actually told the story yesterday to somebody, but I think about, it's funny. There's a guy named, and this is an interesting one. So you see these guys that fight on the ice, and you saw some of those guys, how big they were when they left the room. And anyone who knows hockey or has been in for a while would know the name Ty Domi. Mm-hmm. And guys that played with Ty his whole career. I think I think it might have been his final fight or one of his final fights in the NHL after, I don't even know, I'd have to look it up, 20 plus years career fighting guys that were 5 inches taller and 50 pounds heavier and beating the wheels off these guys. Never bled. I think it was his last fight in the NHL was when he got a little cut on his on his face from his fight with Brian McGrattan, who's 6'4" and 240 pounds, and Ty is 5'8" or 9" and 200 pounds.
That's 6'4" on skates.
Oh yeah,
that's unbelievable.
But in the gym, he had the word on him is that he didn't really train. Well, the problem is you don't understand the pain that these guys are in. Like, you'd see his hands after the game, they'd be swollen, right? And you couldn't shake his hand after. And I remember one time getting on his case a little bit about, you got to get into the gym a little more. And he kind of said, all right, fine. He walked into the gym. He said, what are these guys doing right now? And the guys are doing single arm dumbbell snatches. He grabbed 100-pound, like, walked in cold. The better part of the story, I think he wasn't wearing his full training attire. I'll let your imagination can take you wherever you want with that if you've been in a hockey dressing room. Walked in cold, grabbed the 100-pound dumbbell and just started snatching it for reps over his head while he's turned and looking at me saying, "Are you happy? Is that good enough? Is that strong enough for you?" I remember watching Alex McGillney, who was he was actually the first Russian player, went through that Soviet sports school system. So everything you read about in your books that, that I bought from you, to defect and come over here. And the same thing, guys would get on him about maybe not training as much as they thought he should have. And I remember one time him laughing, saying, boys, I was doing this stuff 20 years ago before you ever heard about it. And he walked over in his suit with his Gucci shoes on. And I think I had about 275 pounds on the bar. Cold, no warm up, dress pants suit, walked under the rack, took it off, squatted, ass to grass, high bar, inch off the ground, turned and said, okay, are you guys happy? Now leave me alone. And walked up, racked the bar, like, to see that some of these, and that's not, but I spent time with the San Francisco 49ers when Larry Allen was there. One of my former teammates, so a guy by the name of Randy Chevrier, he was my teammate in university. He ended up, he got drafted by Jacksonville, got traded to Dallas. And at the time, do you remember a guy by the name of Mark Stepnoski? Mm-hmm. So I would look at, like, again, being a kid in Canada, I'm looking at all these numbers, trying to figure out why I can't play in the NFL, because I can bench as much as this guy and I can run as fast as this guy. And I used to watch this Mark Stepnoski. He's the center for the Dallas Cowboys. And I was 6'1.5", 255. He's 6'1", 250. I'm like, I can play in the NFL. How come he can't play in the NFL? I remember talking to Randy after his first practice. I said, how good is this Mark Stepnoski? He must be amazing. Is it his feet? Is it his hands? What is he? He goes, oh no, Mark's good. Don't get me wrong. He's great. He goes, but he plays beside Larry Allen. And he said Larry Allen, he said, our second play in practice, I blew past Mark and went through to sack the quarterback in practice. The very next play, now Randy's 6'3" at the time, probably 290, 625 squatter, like strong guy, could do a backflip, fast, good athlete. Larry Allen picked Randy up like by the throat and choke slammed him and said, if you ever, and probably a whole bunch of experts, do that again, you Canadian piece of whatever. So like, I think when those stories just sort of show you, like, the training is super important. For sure, it's super important. But these guys are just,
it's another level.
Yeah, they're freaks in many different ways.
Mm-hmm. Are there any topics right now that you're doing a deep dive on?
Yeah, I'm really like, I'm always trying to cover off my own bias. I think at heart, I'm an old school powerlifting meathead guy. So I always try to make sure I'm staying abreast of everything that's the latest and greatest in sports science. And if you came to our facility, we have a more robust suite of tech in our facility than just about, there are some NFL teams or Premier League teams that might have a step up on us, but we'd have more than most NHL teams would ever have in their facility. We've got, a variety of force plates, and we've got all these valve testing equipment, Nord boards and force frames. And I want to make sure that I'm not just settling in on my bias. I want to make sure I'm doing objective testing too. So I'm really trying to look into that to see how much of that is real, how much of that is fluff, how much of that is a distraction. We used to do VBT in season and never off season. I did it in season because it was a way for me to manage guys and keep them from hurting themselves. We're doing a lot more of it in the off season, but I think I want to spend a lot more time studying and looking into a guy like Travis Mash and the things that he does, because we're using it at like probably 5% of its capacity. Mm-hmm. We're using it as a really fancy stopwatch, more or less, right? I think there's a lot more that we could do with that I think I want to learn more about for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And you said you were using VBT 20 years ago?
2023, yeah. Or sorry, 2003, geez.
Yeah, 20 years. Yeah. That's wild. Now, not to go too in depth on it, what sort of kind of basic parameters, because there's a lot of people that are interested in getting it or interested in utilizing it. What are the biggest, pieces of information that people should know about that style of training? So
I went back to those days. We had the old tendos, and I used them again. We would use that cutoff zone, if it's 0.5 meters per second general, to not go any heavier than that. We'd have other days where, 0.75, stay between 0.7, 0.5, 0.9, whatever it was. Again, it was a way it was a little bit of biofeedback, because you never need this kind of stuff for the lazy, shitty, shit bum, fat, skinny guys.
They're gonna intentionally go slower anyway.
You don't need that. You don't you've all seen those guys, the guy that's fat or the guy that doesn't train. You don't need a piece of technology to tell you that he's fat or he's out of shape. Yeah. He knows it. The coach knows it. they want to use that to rub their nose at it and try to expose it. But what you need it for is those guys that show up in the gym. Brian McCabe, who's the director of player development for the Florida Panthers. I remember that with him. That it was the thing that saved me with him. The Omega Wave, our jump mat, and the Tendo, because he would come in if he slept for 2 hours and could barely stand to get out of bed. He's training. If we're squatting, he's squatting. So for him, it was great to say, okay, go as heavy as you want to, because I couldn't tell him to go light. He wouldn't, right? Go as heavy as you want, as long as you can hit those numbers. And if you can't hit the numbers, it just opens the door to a conversation.
Yeah.
Why can't you hit the number? Because you could hit it last week. So what's going on? Like, you know what? I always say, maybe the machine's broken. And we've had that. We had one of these machines where the thing was, wasn't calibrated. But so maybe the machine's broken, but I don't know. Let's talk about it. Your vertical jump is off today. The machine says you're slow today. And you can say, well, fuck, I haven't slept in the last 3 nights. Okay, well, let's unpack that. Let's talk about that, right? So I think it's good for that. We would use it a lot of times. Again, probably the people that have real expertise, Dr. Mann, Travis Mash, whatever, they would probably roll their eyes or be disgusted with it. But we would have competitions such as we'd have the NCAA, like the college kids versus the junior hockey kids, who can hit a higher number on jump squats. We'd have the Europeans versus North Americans. We were using it as a fancy stopwatch, I think that you can get into a lot of the science now. I think some people get carried away a little bit.
Yeah, a little too much.
We don't use it for snatches and cleans or, ballistics, because I think those you just do them as fast as you possibly can. You can't really do them slow, but it's been great for us for sure.
What is the best way for people to get a hold of you or to follow you? Is it?
Yeah, I'm trying, I'm on Instagram. I'm trying, I'm trying. I don't know what I'm doing half the time. I'm we got some young guys, some young coaches on staff that help, but, I do try to do my best in responding like that. They can, Google my name. We have, on the website. I'm not great at responding to people. Have very specific. I'm sure I can't even imagine you get whatever I get times a million. I'm really good at very specific questions. If you want to DM me and ask me how you should live your life and how you should, how
can I get strong?
Yeah. But that I'm not so good at, but I'll tell them to go buy some books from you. But I try to do the best I can, or if people have suggestions for what I should be doing with that stuff or things I should be posting, I'm always open to listen to it.
Any final thoughts?
No, I just think this is so cool. Again, you were a guy that I always looked up to when I first started doing this. So it's an honor to be here. I saw your old shop. I was actually one of the people that you guys were kind enough to allow to go train at Westside a couple of times through Eric, that's a whole other conversation. But so it's a huge honor to be here for sure. You're a guy that I looked up to and in different things. There's a time in my life where I looked up to you because you could squat a lot. Other times in my life, I've looked up to you for how you've transitioned your business and how you built your business. Now, I'm a businessman, or I'm not a businessman. I'm trying to be a businessman myself. So I've looked up to that. So it's a huge honor to be here. But I think also just how important it is for people to do stuff like this, to come to Swiss, to interact with human beings, not just watch stuff on your social media every day. Come see come see the guy on TikTok learned what he was doing from. Come see those guys and form your own opinion. I think if there's a criticism of me sometimes is people said, well, I speak in generalities, or I show you but I think what I try to do is I show you, these are all this is where I learned everything I've learned from. Everything I do, I learned this from this person, I learned this from that person. Instead of just copying what I do, I would suggest that you look at what I'm doing, but find out where I learned it from and then make your own conclusion. Maybe I've adapted that in a way that, is not ideal for you. I've everything I learned from you, Dave, from Charlie Francis, Charles Pollock, and Ken Kanak, and Eric Serrano, Mauro Di Pasquale, Paul Check, blah, 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 blah. The list goes on and on. I adapted it in a way that made sense to me for the athletes that I was working with. But I don't know you, and I don't know what your background is, and I don't know who you've worked with. So I think you should study those same people, meet those same people. I want to also make sure I'm giving respect to those people and not just, hawking their stuff, but showing people where I got my ideas from.
Well, I think it's important for people to develop their own training philosophy.
Yeah.
And that comes from education, experience, and all those things.
Like our lunch conversation where you said, I don't know how you should train.
Yeah.
This is how I trained. And that's what you've done. You've done an incredible job of that. This is what I did. here's a whole bunch of articles. Some of them I agree with, some of them I don't. Some of them I think are cool, some of them I think are weird. But it's about But you've got this. You've built this incredible buffet that you've made available to people, and they can come and pick and choose.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to do.
You did it.
Was to be able to throw it all out there so people can use it to develop their own philosophy and go from there, instead of just being stuck in a bias, which we all do. But as long as you know what your bias is, as you just said a little bit earlier, if you know what your bias is, then try to find ways to not have that.
Absolutely.
You know, to kind of work. And then that builds that philosophy even more so. I want to thank you for coming out. This has been freaking awesome. It's been great to catch up.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
And we're done. When we break this down, you have an explosive day, which starts with the gah work. And then after that movement, you have the raw work. And then the puff, puff, puff work. It's part of the horse cocking method.
For sure. If you have no focus, you have to come to a conclusion at some point. Otherwise, it's a waste of gym time. Because if you're not going to one-up something, then it's 2 steps back.